Hello and welcome everybody to today's Intuitive Growth with Oracle and Tarot Cards series. I am very honored to be sharing this time with Alaura or DELL, with all of you as well, because I met Alaura through a mix match of synchronicities. I ended up at an event she was hosting. I still don't know how. She doesn't know how. But I was there and I hopped in right when you were beginning to do a card reading. And it was just so pure and perfect. My heart just lit up as soon as you spoke. So hello, Laura, how are you doing today?
Hi, well, I'm good. And it's just past noon and I'm in Northern California. So we just had a little brief share before we recorded, but I'm actually in the area where the Northern Californian fires are, which is stressful, but for some reason, I'm not as stressed as last time. I think I know that I'm safe right now. And you can tell by my accent, I'm not originally from California. So I'm originally from London, grew up in the East End of London. And that's so funny. I automatically just went and grabbed one of my decks that I play with that's here. And I've been living in Northern California since 1992. So 28 years. I've been here a long time. And that's when I was introduced to divination cards when I was still in Britain. Mm-hmm. I remember I went to, there was a big psychic event in Brighton. Is that okay if I just keep rolling?
Go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. I was living in Brighton the last 3 years before I moved from Britain. And I remember having this reading with a psychic, and one of the things she said is that you're going to live in a country with a female relative, or move to a country with a female relative. And I thought, well, that's interesting because most of my relatives are here, but actually my grandmother and aunt were in the States. And she said that I would be living by the ocean. And I thought, well, that's interesting because I live by the ocean. You know, I live by the English Channel anyway. And I had no plans of moving at all. And then this big life event happened. And I found myself flying I was in Kathmandu in Nepal doing some volunteer work. And then not going back to Brighton, not going back to England, and flying straight to California. And I live pretty close to the ocean. I mean, you know, a 30-minute drive, but as the crow flies, not very far. And then here got more connected with this very progressive, liberal arts healing community where I was living, and met someone who is a tarot reader, and started to get regular tarot readings. And she's really amazing. And then when I come back to England, I get readings from a friend of mine who is also Sally Griffin. I'm pretty sure you were
She's amazing.
Yeah. And she is a really amazing tarot reader. So I've always felt that the tarot reader that I have here, it's almost as if she's psychic, because I can, you know, sort of say what the big question is I'm asking. And she ends up sort of also answering in the reading all the questions that I didn't ask out loud. And I almost feel like it's a psychic reading, but she is just so incredibly tuned in. So I feel for those big questions in life that I tend to, you know, go and have a reading with someone else. And for myself, I have several divination packs, and I just bought a new one that I like, but I'm not so connected to. But when I'm in my routine and I'm doing well in my routine, then I, you know, shuffle the pack either every morning, and if I rushed out of bed that morning and forgotten, you know, I come back to them in the evening, and, you know, it really helps me ground, and it helps to remind me what, you know, what the important things are. Because I've got decks with certain cards with messages of self-care and going out in nature, and messages like that. So I find them incredibly healing for myself, and then I'll pour them for other people, or as you've experienced, I'll also pour them in groups as well.
Beautiful. There was so much that you offered in that share. It's like, where do we dive into first? First off, I do want to ask, you said you had that, you know, huge life change and you didn't end up going back home. You ended up going to a whole new country. Was that a intuitive instinct to follow that? How, if you can elaborate, please.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. Well, it's sort of interesting. It's similar to what I was sharing with you before we, you know, the camera started rolling, of, you know, questioning really what's going on in the United States right now politically. And also because I live in an area with major fires, you know, many homes have just been burnt down in the last few days where in the area that I live. And when I was in England, the last couple of years I was there, at least, I just felt really unhappy there. I didn't like how it was politically. We just came out of a very long era of the Thatcher government. And then, you know, the Conservative government continued, but not with Thatcher as the Prime Minister. And it felt really oppressive, and especially to artists or anyone being outspoken or anyone that didn't fit into the status quo, into the mainstream. So I was saying to friends and to my husband at the time, I really want to move. And the thought of moving out of the country was so huge with 2 young children, and moving away from my friends and family and everything that was familiar. So we ended up going on this trip I was in the entertainment business, and we were in a band, and we were invited to Tokyo to do a big concert for Panasonic, actually. And then while we were there, we were going to visit a good friend in Thailand. And then we had met some people up in Scotland. Up at, do you know the Buddhist monastery Sami Ling?
No, but it sounds like a place I should find.
Yeah, you should find it. It's sort of located in the area of Lockerbie. And we got to Lockerbie, and we were lost, and we were driving along this road very late at night, and suddenly there was a man standing there in a white suit in the middle of the night. It was almost like an apparition. And we pulled over, and he needed a ride home. And he had this very posh English accent where we were like, oh, do you need a ride or something? Or do you know where Sami Ling is? And he was like, yes, if you just follow this road and go to the end of the road and then make a right and you follow the pine. And it's just it was just like, wow. And then we dropped him off at his house, and I remember turning around immediately, and he'd gone. And I looked back on that, and I thought, I wonder if he was a ghost, or he was sent by someone at Sami Ling to point us in the right direction. So we ended up at Sami Ling in the early hours of the morning, and the sun was just coming up. And one of the Buddhist nuns came out, and she was like, oh, we were expecting you. And we never said, you know, when we were going to arrive, and took us to the main monk. And He had toast and breakfast ready for us. Anyway, to cut a long story short, from that connection, we were connected to someone that was connected to them who volunteered in Kathmandu with people who are homeless. And so we went there and we were helping to feed people in Kathmandu in a soup kitchen. And while we were there, Scotland Yard raided our house and took away all our archives, all the photo albums of the children and our children, and videos of them growing up. And there was this front page story on the News of the World to say that my husband was a Satanist and all this crazy stuff. And we spoke to our lawyer and said, what should we do? And he said, well, you haven't done anything wrong, and there's no charges against you for any crimes. But if I was you, I wouldn't come home, because the paparazzi would just harass you, and social services could still take your children into care because you've been accused in the media of being Satanists. Oh. And there was a big case in Scotland at the time, I think on the Orkney Islands, where I think one child had made a comment at the nursery about something witchy, and it ended up that basically Child Protective Services and the police raided all these homes. I mean, you can look this case up. They took the children away, and the parents eventually got their children back, but in some cases it took years for them to get them back. So our lawyer was saying, this case has just happened in the Orkneys. It's probably not, if I was you, I wouldn't come back to Britain with your children. So we were stranded in Kathmandu, but I found a postcard from friends who lived in Northern California who said, if you ever need a refuge, call us. And they meant if you're ever on tour in the band and you need a day off from touring, come and visit. So, and again, another long story short, we called them and then they said, yeah, we'll meet you from the airport. So that's how we ended up in California. And that was the long story. My intuition kept saying, let's get out of Britain. You should get out of Britain. It's, like this is, and the thing was that Scotland Yard raided our house the morning that we would have just arrived home on our flight. Oh, and there was one more piece. We couldn't get our original flight home anyway, because my ex-husband was saying, although he's my husband at the time, we have to go home. We've got all our work is there. But the Nepali pilots went on strike. So we couldn't even get our flight. So the flight we were meant to be on would have got us back home like an hour or two before Scotland Yard raided our house.
You were very divinely protected.
Yeah, absolutely divinely protected. So yeah, and I didn't go back to Britain, even though there was no charges, again, I didn't go back for 4 years. I just didn't know. I felt, I didn't know if I was going to arrive at the airport and someone was going to arrest me on some trumped up charge. So that's how I ended up in California, and my intuition now is it's time to get out, even though, I love it here. It's beautiful where I live. I'm on the outer suburbs, but literally I can get in my car within 5 minutes. Within 5 minutes, I'm in the countryside, and I'm near the ocean. I'm an hour from Golden Gate Bridge. So if I want to go to San Francisco, I'm right there. And my children and my granddaughter is here, but something is telling me, get out. And then I had a really profound dream the other night where I saw my house was all boarded up, all the windows and the door. And I thought, oh my gosh, what's this message in the dream? Like my house has been repossessed. I haven't been able to pay the mortgage. But then all the houses down the street were boarded up. And I just watched this film, which I highly recommend to everyone, The Social Dilemma. It's on Netflix. It's about social media. And there's extremely, like, probably the most intelligent people working in technology and tech companies today being interviewed. And they've all had, either still have, or most of them had, and are not working there anymore, like senior positions at social media companies, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Google. And they're ex-executives and senior consultants, and extremely rational. Like, no one's on there sort of talking about conspiracy theories. And one of the speakers at the very end, they said to him, what's your biggest concern right now? And his response was, in the immediate future. And he's referring to the States. He said, civil war. And it just, made me think, I'm not the only person that thinks this is a possibility, and more than a possibility. So as I'm saying this to you, I think, I should go and get a reading from Magic, who's the person that I've been having readings with for at least 25 years. I think probably closer to 28 years since I got here. Yeah. Yeah. So, and in my divination cards, I've been pulling new location in my cards quite a bit. And I thought I was going to be moving to the, into the countryside here instead of on the outer edges of the suburbs. And now I actually, especially since the fire started here, I've been looking at houses in England and just thinking, I think I just need to move back to England. Like, where else am I going to go, especially with Brexit? Before, I had 27 different countries that, or more, that I could choose from with the EU, but now that's changing. And there's a lot that I love about Britain. And I feel like it's really changed in the 30 years since I left. Like, there was always, there's been that history. There's been sort of an alternative culture there, and especially around paganism. And down in Cornwall, there's actually a museum, the Museum of Witchcraft. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's in Boscastle. It's really interesting because it's got artifacts going back hundreds of years and connecting, because the word, as you probably know, as of a witch, really translates to wise person. So if you ever find yourself in Cornwall, or make a special trip down there to go. But I feel that even though it has this rich history, it's on the last 30 years, I think there's and I'd like to, hear from you, because you actually are living there, that I feel that it's become much more alternative. Like, before, people didn't hug you and kiss you and say I love you when you were saying goodbye to your friend. But now people are, and there's, it seems much more common to be like, go and get a Reiki treatment instead of going to your doctor. And homeopathy has always been pretty big in Britain because of partly because of the royal family. There's a homeopathic hospital in London. I thought there was one in Scotland as well, but I'm not sure if there was.
I'm not sure. I don't think I've been here long enough to find that out.
Yeah, there is one in London. Yeah, by the Great Ormond Street. Yeah, yeah.
Beautiful. Well, the world is definitely changing in the consciousnesses that we are moving from, which is a big, when a way of living changes, there's always a kickback. There's always a temper tantrum. There's always something volatile involved in some way or other. And that's a big reason why I'm doing this intuitive growth series, is because it's one of those awareness nurturers for everyone out there that, oh, this thing I'm playing with, these cards, these hugging, these people healing me with just their hands, all of these different alternative methods, they are becoming more and more normal. And I found it so interesting when you shared about the child, who just mentioned the witchcraft, and even your husband and such. Like, I know I always considered those kind of I don't even know what the word is, but like those kind of situations happening, like I'm thinking of like Salem kind of a thing, but that's very recent actually. That's not 100 years ago. It's quite recent in our times, and I didn't realize that was still happening. So it just shows there's still so much growth available for us, which is quite powerful in its own way. Definitely.
Exactly. I don't think some of the witchcraft laws were actually still active up until the 1970s in Britain.
Oh, wow.
Don't take my word for it, but I'm pretty sure. So
Yeah.
this happened to us in the end of 1991. And even though they weren't charging us on being witches, there was that element of like, wow, they're still talking about Satanism. I mean, it felt very much like what the Salem witch trials would have been. And again, what happened up in Scotland. And I'm very sure it was up in the Orkney Isles. And so, with that, it's almost, like the English still attacking the Scottish. Like maybe there's not a war, a full-on war going on between England and Scotland, but there's still that way of how we still subjugating, like the British crown, the English crown, the sort of Scottish people. So I can see why there's been a call for Scottish independence.
Definitely. Could I ask, I'm sure everyone listening to this is just as curious as me. What was the premise, if you feel uncomfortable sharing, that's all right, but what was the premise that they called your then partner a Satanist for?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, he was an artist, a pretty famous artist in performance art and then with music, and a writer. He passed away in March. And, all the big publications, the New York Times, on the BBC, the New Yorker, the Rolling Stone, all wrote pieces on and obituaries on his death. His name was Genesis P. Orridge. And so he was always extremely outspoken. And in 1976, he had an art show at the ICA in London, the Institute of Contemporary Art, which is, the building is actually owned by the Crown Properties, by the Queen. And he titled that show Prostitution. And it was really about, if you can go and buy this was before I knew him. So I'm sort of going to paraphrase this, but you can go and buy a pornography magazine or a film or a video. But he was cutting up pages of those magazines and collaging them over postcards of the royal family, and then sending them in the mail. But then, he could have, he was brought up in Parliament, and the Queen sent her officials to close down the show. But basically, that would have been a crime to sort of send these postcards, because it's sort of pornography without being an envelope, etc. So he just continued to be outspoken, and we had made a film that had nudity in. So we would sort of always be pressing these boundaries with a famous British filmmaker called Jarman, who some of his more famous films were Edward II and Jubilee and The Last of England. One of the actresses that worked with him early on and became famous was Tilda Swinton. You probably heard of Tilda Swinton, but
I'm not very good with names in general.
Yeah, she's a pretty famous, very famous British actress that I think has been nominated for Oscars, and a couple of other people that he worked with. So a week after our house was raided, there was an interview with Derek Jarman in I believe it was the Telegraph, saying, this is just tabloid fodder. None of this is true. This was an art film that we made, etc., etc. But it was a huge, big story that apparently the people behind writing the story in the News of the World was Christian journalists who are evangelical. And I think that's probably why I've been so interested in this film, the social media, the social dilemma film, was just how much, I mean, in a way, Trump is probably correct when he says, like the media lies. I mean, of course the media lies, but, also the media lies on his, on his views in terms of, they support him, like Fox News Channel in the States support him. But I mentioned to you, I'm reading this novel right now about the Kindertransport, and one of the last pages I read, the author has done all her research on what was happening in Germany with Hitler, but Hitler, one of the things that he wasn't really known for, apart from his mass murder and mass killing, was saying that the media is lying. The media is against him and is lying, and he's not doing all the things that he's doing, etc. So it's really, you got to do your research. And Genesis, the father of my ex-husband, the father of my children, would say, those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
This is true.
And I think the original saying is, those who do not remember history are condemned to repeat it. And we don't remember. Our memories are really short, so we keep repeating and repeating, habits and history, and to the detriment, and also, to very disastrous outcomes.
And alongside that, with each new generation, there's a generation that doesn't know. A whole new generation brings in a whole new consciousness, and they're not focused on the things of the past, because why should they be? They're still learning about the world, right? So I do feel in what you're sharing there's the balancing of not remembering to keep us stuck in what happened, but being aware and allowing that, remembering to be in service to remember what happened when you bit your brother. Like that,
right.
That didn't turn out well for you, right? Like, let's not do that in the future. Versus the fear of what the punishment is when we live in that way. Because I suppose that fear within itself, fear likes to keep itself closed off and hidden, because that's when it's strongest, is when no one's talking about it and aware of it and sharing it openly. So the awareness, like how you're sharing about what you're reading, is very valuable.
Yes, I think what you just shared is a really good point. And I think, I mean, I have great hope for the future generation and the future generations changing things, like Greta Thunberg, sort of, who would think sort of a 16-year-old, maybe, I think she's 17 now, but, someone so young speaking out, and speaking into what's going on with global climate change. And then so many people, in Britain who are speaking out against climate change. and all over the world are very young, often very young. And in the States, there's been a whole movement of, teenagers and young teenagers who are becoming activists against the pro-gun laws. And many of them have been affected personally by, going to school and being the survivors of, a mass shooting in the school. So I think there's great hope for younger generations. And I also think, we have to be aware of the past. And that's where it seems Germany, has been very conscious about, having statues and monuments and museums, but saying, never forget. Because it's so easy to go down that path again, because we're always pointing the finger at someone else to say, we're going through a recession, it must be your fault. It must be your fault because you're Jewish. It must be your fault because you're Black. It must be whatever it is. And we have to see the bigger picture. It's like the macrocosm and the microcosm of, when they say, like think globally and act locally, and it was one of the big things that Gandhi talked about. Who would think that one man, of course he had a lot of supporters, but could change, who could basically kick the British out of India. And also and so much of that for him was started when he was a lawyer in South Africa. He hadn't been used to sort of dealing with apartheid laws.
His foundation really created the platform for him to be who he was.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have to think that one person can change the world, and people are, but we're much stronger if we're together. And really, it's just, we all want the same thing. And if we can focus on love and kindness, as opposed to, hate and separation, we can do great things, and we have done great things. So I think that's where I stay in the positive of having awareness of, you got to be aware that, some pretty awful things are happening in the world. It's easy to be in a bubble and also know that there's a lot of good news going on as well as the bad news.
Yes. So how does the ritual of your daily reading the cards for yourself, how does that support you in your microcosm of your macrocosm of your daily living?
Thank you. That's a good question. Well, it helps to bring me grounded and focused when I'm thinking. And it also reminds me that there's another, reality that I can go beyond. Yeah, this is my work, this is my business, this is what I have to do today. I've got to make my bed and throw some laundry in and, reply to these emails and build an Eventbrite listing and And yet I'm coming back to the reminder that there's a whole other world out there. The veil between the worlds is the thinnest. It's and how to get beyond to the bigger world, that's out there, the magical realm.
Yes, I love that wording. To tap into the magical realm and be aligned with that. Absolutely. Oh, that's gorgeous. You shared, when you said that you bought a new card deck, there's a small part of me that got a little bit jealous, but I've got more than enough card decks. So, but when you said that, you said you're not as connected to that deck. What feeling or awareness, like what lets you know that you're connected with the deck? Are you able to put that into words?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, well, it's a great deck and it has beautiful images. It's a deck on the Bhagavad Gita. So you pull a card and, there's sort of a message from the Bhagavad Gita and part of it is in Sanskrit. But I think if I sort of go into my analytical mind, but in my intuitive self, why I'm not connecting with it as much as my other cards, I'm finding it very masculine. And, it's a wonderful story in so many ways, the Bhagavad Gita, but, it's also, it's very patriarchal and there's this big war going on. And so the decks that I tend to use are sort of, written by women and, many of the artists are women and will have more of a feminine feel. I have one of my decks is the goddess card. So it's almost like you can't get more feminine than that.
That's the deck I first received from you from, and the goddess spoke.
Right. Yeah. So I'm not really using that deck. I mean, it's the Bhagavad Gita one. It's got beautiful images and artwork, but I'm not connecting it to it.
It's beautiful that you have that awareness of what energetic insight allows you to tap into the magical realms. Because if you were maybe needing that more masculine energy, that would be connecting with you. But you have that awareness of, no, that's not there. So I'm curious where this kind of fits in the line of that awareness of you have these, you don't consider yourself to be a psychic, but we all are intuitive in one way or another. And we connect with our intuition in different ways. So when you read for other people, so you don't do personal readings for other people, when you pull cards in groups and then environments, what gives you the confidence to trust what comes through is aligned for everyone?
It's another good question. I think I don't even think about it I just stay in my intuitive self and I don't go into intellectualizing it in any way, like, oh, would this, maybe, I think if I'm in my self-doubt, I would feel like, oh, would this work for this group? But I stay in the trust and in the intuition. And, and also trust that people who are in the group are open, even if they're strangers, to me pulling cards. And I feel on that level, it's like I feel that the people who come, like yourself, that you weren't sure how you got there and how you found out about it, but are there for a reason, and that would be open to me, shuffling and pulling a card for the group. And I think I feel like it's always a really good way to center us all and bring us back to the present moment. So, so I suppose, it's trust and intuition.
This is a original question just for you. You're wonderful with words. Great is an understatement. For those who don't know, Alaura, you teach how to write, is that correct? Well, you teach writing workshops, but...
Yeah, I facilitate, sometimes it's like, oh, do I teach? And I feel like I don't teach, I facilitate. I facilitate holding safe space for people to write their stories and tell their stories. Yeah.
And just the divine feminine in that.
Yeah, thank you. And that's my main hat that I wear. Well, my other main hat is that I facilitate a women's networking group, Women's Spirit and Business, which is not just about business, but how we connect spiritually. And I think that's one of the reasons why I use do the divination in most of those meetings.
integrate that in. We'll come back to that at the end, because I definitely want everyone to know how they can connect with you in deeper ways and connect with your magic. So because everyone adds in a little message with the cards, or the message is written on the cards, but you're a very all-around artistic person. So do you find when you draw the cards, is it the picture that really helps ground you? Do you find value in the words? I'm just curious with how those resonate with you.
I I think I'm drawn to decks that have beautiful imagery and that have simple words on the cards. Like with a traditional tarot deck, there's not really the message on the card. It might say the Knight of Discs, or with the major arcana, it may say love. But it's, unless you know those cards really well and what they mean for you, you're going to have to get your book and, like read up on that card. Whereas the divination cards that I use, so I've been shuffling while we've been talking, and I pulled from my goddess deck and I got Irene, which is peace. And I love the image here of the goddess holding the child, and she has like abundance, like corn and berries wrapped in her other arm. And the message is, there's no need to worry, as everything is working out beautifully. Which, so for me, it's like a very, succinct message on the card that is really like, oh, if I'm worrying about, how am I going to pull all this together? It's like, oh, that's a message to say it's okay. And then I pulled another card from my other deck, which I've been pulling almost every day, which is focus. And that's especially with business, for me, running my own business, but I think for anyone, or if you're working on a particular project, you really have to focus. And it's so easy to get distracted. The phone rings, an email comes in, but you've been working on this one thing, and then you're like, oh, is this, urgent for me to work on these other things? And it's like, no, just, focus. And then the other one is such a beautiful, beautiful image that I pulled of a sleeping woman. There's angels, fairies around her, and a heron. And, it's just the imagery, and it says, follow your dreams. So I think it's cards that I love, that it's both. It's like a beautiful image with a clear, concise message that I don't have to go and grab a book, especially if I'm in a rush to see, oh, what does the Nine of Discs mean, So yeah.
Definitely. And if I may offer, with what you were sharing throughout this interview and conversation together, that focus being on peace.
Right.
That connection there, that those cards also speak with each other. Just that you mentioned you're getting that card every day, and as soon as you said that, I was like, oh, that's a beautiful combination right there.
Right, to be there. Yeah, like if you think of all the world's population, especially leaders of the world, focused on peace, where we would be.
Isn't it so amazing that each and every one of us is a leader in our own way, co-creators of this world that we live in?
Right, exactly. Yeah, that was lovely. That was beautifully said.
Thank you. And you have a book that you wanted to share with everyone about another leader who's sharing her magic, and I think it ties in perfectly with you sharing about the tarot cards, because tarot, a big difference between tarot and oracle cards is tarot really, it's got a set suit, it's got set messages around the cards, and then each person who reads it gives the divination in a unique way, whereas oracle cards, there's a lot more angels and elementals and goddesses and a wider variety of sources for the oracle cards to share a message from. If you want to share the book.
Yeah, thank you. This is a book, Magic Tarot, and the tarot reader who wrote it her name is Magic. She's known by Magic. A Journey of Self-Realization by Magic Ortman. And I'll just read you the back. You have a role to play in the theater of life. Magic Tarot will draw back the curtain of your personal story, revealing all the characters, actions, and emotions that spotlight your life lessons and how to grow into your full potential. And then she talks about what she combines in the book to for readings, and it's a great resource book. And she uses the images of the Crowley deck, which she calls the Freda Harris deck, because the artist who worked on the cards was Freda Harris. So here's the Prince of Wands, and on the front, I think this is the High Priestess card, I think. Yeah.
It's beautiful, that cover.
Yeah. So, I think this is the tarot reader that I've been getting readings with for almost 30 years. Yeah, highly, highly recommend her. So if anyone wants to know how to get a reading with her, she does Zoom readings now, like everyone else, then you could reach out to me. Yeah.
Beautiful. I have 2 final questions, and I feel like you kind of already answered this a little bit in me asking about what about the words and the artistry, resonates with you. So you might need to dig a little bit deeper, because I feel like there's something else available still here. And what about using these cards as a daily ritual for you? Really light your heart up, and not just using them as a tool for a daily ritual, but you being somebody that this is a norm in your life, that's a part of your world.
Yeah. And again, it's just where it really grounds me. And if I'd love to say I meditate every day. I don't, I did this morning. It's what I love to do, is to, find that time to meditate, even if it's for 10 minutes. But the cards, I'm sort of a person who's almost like out of sight, out of mind. Like I have to write all my lists. And if I forget to do things, I'll forget to do things if I haven't made a Post-it note. Like I've, had these pink Post-it notes on my computer, things to do. But with my cards, they're sitting by my bed and they're always there. And it's like, I didn't pull my cards today. And then it will bring me back to center and being grounded. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love that reminder you just offered to everyone who maybe there's somebody who just plays with their cards and feels like they don't meditate, so they don't know how to read it well enough, or some perception based on an expectation that it's just a judgment in reality. And that's a beautiful reminder that connecting with your cards can be your meditation, or your connection to that spirit and divine energy as well. So thank you for sharing that. I feel like that's a very valuable golden nugget for everyone to take home. And the final question is, so we've got different links for you in the bio for people to find you. When people go to a Woman in Spirit business, or write your unique memoir, or your Facebook page, what will they find?
Well, Women in Spirit and Business is a networking group, and as I mentioned, it's not just about business, but it is for women. It's for any, any individual who identifies as being female. So, trans women are definitely invited to join us. And we have different motivational speakers or authors, people who come in and talk to us and be keynote speakers, but it's really a place that we can support each other in business, or if we haven't decided what our business is, or don't even know if we're going to start one, that we're there. It's for healers, for creatives. So that's a great place to come on board. And you can always come for free the first time, and then I keep the cost really low, and then I'm doing special offers for people to become members. So people can find out on the link. So if they go to womenspiritandbusiness.com and then press on events, and then there'll be the event to whenever you're going to release this video, but there'll be the next Friday event coming up. Yeah, so that's what I do. And I also facilitate women's writing groups. And again, all women who identify as being female. I have several workshops coming up in October. Yeah.
And if you don't consider yourself a writer, but you really love it, Alaura holds beautiful space for that. I really received a lot during that workshop.
Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, beginners are totally welcome. People who always, people say, I'm not a writer, but it's really not about learning to write. It's about how we drop in and tell our stories. And those stories might be completely fictional, but holding a space for people to write. Yeah. Yeah.
And in a thank you, you just used those words, drop in again, which you used with one of the questions, saying you just drop into that space of your intuition. And out of those 3 cards, one of those cards were 110% for me, the Follow Your Dreams one. I was doing a whole card reading for myself this morning, and the question was around my dreams and such like that. And then also the heron. Whenever the heron comes up, there's a very personal connection with the divine feminine for me in that. So as soon as you held that up, I had a smile, and just a beautiful reminder in closing. You don't have to consider yourself an expert in anything or a professional in anything or any label with anything, but as soon as you drop into that space of intuition and trust that you're doing something that your heart enjoys and lights you up, people are able to receive.
Thank you. You said that really wonderfully. Well, thank you so much for having me on and inviting me. It's really been a pleasure, and it's got me back again to the bigger picture of, we can get caught up in the details, but what's the bigger picture?
Beautiful. So thank you, Alaura. Thank you, everyone else out there. And until next time. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.